Hello everyone! We continue the series of videos on the graphic tablet. This is probably the most important lesson. I'll try to give you some foundation, I'll talk about graphic tablets, show you how to use them, tell you about the most important programs, especially about SAI 2, because I use it myself and I'm very familiar with it. And most importantly, using the eye from the thumbnail as an example, I'll demonstrate the basic drawing techniques. It's going to be interesting, so get comfortable and let's get started. So, to draw on a graphic tablet, you need, surprisingly, a graphic tablet. I'll briefly talk about the main points in my new tablet, which might be perfect for you because it offers an excellent balance of price and quality. Graphic tablets come in two types, with and without a monitor. The first option is better, easier to get used to, but it's much more expensive. Generally, the price range for graphic tablets is vast, so focus on the most important features to choose the optimal option for a certain amount. These features include the type of tablet, resolution, active area size, pen sensitivity, and response rate. To help you orient yourself, here's a small table with figures below which, in my opinion, the tablet is not worth buying. Of course, all this information is relevant at the time of the video release. Another piece of advice: try to choose tablets from trusted manufacturers specializing in producing graphic tablets, like Wacom, Huion, and XP Pen. Personally, I have two tablets from Huion, and I'm very satisfied with them. Now, a few words about my new device, the Huion H1060p. As you can see, it's slightly smaller than its older sibling, but for me, this size is perfect. It's still large, but more convenient and portable. Regarding the specs, they are at a high level, as you can see in the table. I'm particularly pleased with the pen sensitivity. This pen, in fact, sets this Huion model apart from its predecessors. It has 4 times more sensitivity levels, requires no charging, and I can say it's comfortable to hold due to this extension. Unfortunately, it doesn't work with other previous generation models, so simply buying a new pen won't upgrade it, most likely. Another thing I can say is that despite these excellent specs, the tablet has a very reasonable price. Why is that, you might ask? Firstly, the tablet is smaller, and secondly, it lacks various additional features like wireless access, Wi-Fi, indicators, built-in memory. The tablet itself looks simpler, but it's smartly designed. For instance, this slant prevents the hand from hitting the corner during work. There are programmable buttons on the side, making it convenient for both right-handed and left-handed users, and that's a plus. And something interesting, I didn't immediately understand why this loop was needed. Hanging the tablet on the wall didn't seem sensible, but later, I realized it's for the stylus. Overall, an excellent tablet, folks. Oh, by the way, be attentive because Huion has other older models in the 1060 lineup. As far as I understood, this 1060p model with the P index is the newest, and only it among the lineup has a non-rechargeable pen. That's all about the tablets. Well, I think you're not here for this, but you want me to show you how to work on them. So here's the tablet. If it's not an interactive monitor, you'll need to connect it to the computer, just like a mouse or keyboard. You might even need to download special drivers for it. In my case, everything worked without them. Something was installed automatically from the tablet. However, the buttons didn't function, and I had to download special software for them. Working on a tablet is done within programs, and there are a vast number of them. Practically all graphic editors are supported through tablets. I even managed to draw in Paint. However, it's better to choose more serious editors. Many people like Photoshop. If you're familiar with it and skilled in editing photos, why not? Personally, I didn't get along with Photoshop. Right from the start, I got hooked on GIMP and used it for photo editing. However, when I began exploring digital art, I realized that GIMP wasn't ideal for drawing. So I learned another, maybe the most popular drawing program, Paint Tool SAI 2. And I'll demonstrate everything using this program as an example. So here's the program interface. First, we need to understand it because drawing entirely depends on it. I won't go too deep, I'll cover only the most essential parts. To start drawing, you need to create a new canvas. This is done in the File, New tab. By the way, I'm doing all these actions not with a mouse but with a pen. Here we choose the canvas size. The default setting is 2K, which I find optimal. Remember, the higher the resolution, the smoother the drawing, but it puts more strain on the computer. Okay, a white sheet has appeared, a new canvas, and this is where we'll work. We'll get back to the top of the program, to these tabs, later. For now, let me explain the other panels and windows here, and how to work with them. Above the canvas is the Quick Access panel. Here, we're interested in the scaling, rotation, and smoothing tools. It's straightforward. Scaling changes the size, and clicking on the square resets it. The same goes for rotation. This function is handy because rotating your hand on the tablet like on paper won't work, especially at the beginning. Rotation helps avoid uncomfortable hand positions while drawing. Another important function is undo or redo. For drawing, this is crucial as it applies to actions on the canvas or with layers. Undo is used most often, so it's convenient to set buttons on the tablet or use key combinations Ctrl-Z and Ctrl-Y. The last tool from this panel is smoothing. It helps make lines smoother and more polished. At different values, there's a visible difference. At 0, lines are sharper, and at 13, they become more fluid. Experimenting with this value is necessary because at too high values, the line begins to lag behind the hand. The next important panel is the Tool panel. Here we can select necessary tools and brushes, customize them, choose sizes, and so on. Let me explain this in more detail. I'll start with brushes. I often use standard ones, although the program allows creating new ones or loading ready-made sets. For starting with basic brushes, the default set will suffice. In the settings of each brush, you can change the size, affecting the line thickness, and density, determining color saturation. There's also the option to adjust line hardness, affecting the sharpness of edges. The program remembers these settings, so the next time you open it, everything will remain as you left it. So, the most used brushes: pencil, airbrush, and brush. The pencil creates sharp lines and is perfect for contours. The airbrush is good for coloring and creating semi-transparent layers. The brush combines properties of the airbrush and pencil, allowing smooth transitions and color blending. Next in line is the watercolor brush. In terms of properties, it doesn't resemble watercolor, in my opinion. It would have been better to call it a blur. The pen pressure primarily adjusts density. The width of the stroke hardly changes, and importantly, if you press lightly, there won't be any color. It won't appear. But even in such cases, the brush serves its main purpose: blending colors. I mainly use it to create beautiful transitions and gradients. Brush number 5 is a marker. Light pressure changes thickness, but it strongly affects transparency. It doesn't blend colors, but has an interesting effect. Unlike the brush tool, when used lightly on a blank canvas or a painted area, the marker intensifies the color on the painted spot. I rarely use this, so I hardly draw with the marker. After the marker, there are somewhat different tools. First is the eraser. It's clear why it's needed. By default, it erases harshly, but we can easily change its density. Then it begins erasing softly, simulating a blotch. Cell pen and sealers are used for highlighting, essentially working like a magic wand, but manually. I'll explain a bit more about this, but later. Next is the fill tool. It's called a bucket, or paint bucket, a tool that fills an area with a single color. The binary brush probably won't be very useful for you. And who'd have thought about the gradient? You can draw gradients. I might have confused you, so try to remember simply that among all the brushes, there's only one that blends colors well: the watercolor brush. Its main use is color blending. The pencil draws firmly and densely, ideal for drawing lines. The airbrush creates transparent layers and is great for coloring. The brush tool is something in between the airbrush and pencil, capable of blending colors. Don't forget about the eraser and fill tool. At the outset, try using these brushes this way. Later, when you gain experience, you can start experimenting. That covers the brush panel. Above the brushes in the program, there's another useful window. If you've worked in any editors before, you'll be able to grasp what's what here. Initially, you'll only need the selection and pipette. There are 3 types of selections here: rectangular, freehand, and magic wand. Rectangular and freehand selections, I think, are self-explanatory. Draw where you want to select. The wand selects color or outlines, allowing you to isolate a piece and perform various operations with it. Now, about the pipette. It's also a very useful tool, helping to save colors from a drawing. How does it work? Suppose I've drawn something and I need a specific shade. Instead of searching for it, I click on the pipette and select the desired color. We've reached the color panel. The beautiful circle is a color wheel. In the ring, choose the color you want. In the square, you can fine-tune the shade. Above the circle, there are several icons opening other tool panels. You can experiment with them. I'll talk about just one panel now. It's like a palette. Here we save colors, like skin tones for instance. Let me show you an example. Load a photo with a face, like this one. Use the pipette to select a light skin tone, and it's saved. Click on the square with the left mouse button to create a color. This way we can choose several shades from light to dark. This is just one way to use this tool. There are others, but we don't have time for them right now. Now, the last panel I'll tell you about is the layer panel. Layers are crucial in graphic editors. I'll demonstrate how they work in the final part of the video. But for now, let's focus on their functionality. If you look at this window, you'll see the layer itself. For now, it's just one, the canvas I created at the very beginning. Let's add new layers here. I click on this icon. Now there are 2 layers. We can create as many as we need, 3, 4, 5, 10, and so on. To delete an unnecessary layer, click on it and then on the trash can, right here. Next to the bin, there are a couple of useful functions. For instance, clearing the layer's content, something some of you noticed I often used. Let me show you again for example. I'll draw a few lines. Suppose I don't like them. I want to clear everything. Instead of erasing with the eraser, it's much faster to click here. Let's move on. This icon helps merge 2 layers into one, and this one moves the content of the selected layer to the bottom. I won't talk about vector layers yet. You might also find creating folders useful. It's convenient when you have many layers and need to group them. Although initially, you might not need this. Just like with all other layers, we can move the folder. To place a layer into it, drag it while holding the pen or left mouse button. Clicking on the arrow allows collapsing or expanding the folder's content. Regarding the Layers panel, that's about it. The last thing to mention about this program is these tabs. Among those you'll definitely need, and that don't duplicate the functions of the panel, is the File tab. You'll absolutely have to use it. This is where I initially created the canvas and where we can immediately save our project. It's done exactly the same way as in other programs. Through the Export tab, you can output an image from the program. I usually export to JPEG or PNG formats. It's all intuitively understandable, so no need for explanations there. Also useful is the Filter tab. Here you can adjust the colors of the drawing to your liking. I'll demonstrate this a bit later in the actual drawing. The Window and Help tabs are more for advanced users to customize the program and its interface to their preferences. Well, I've covered all the essentials, I think. Oh yes, I haven't explained how to change the scale. You'll regularly need to do this. You can change the scale using the mouse wheel, or through this little window, or simply configure the keys on your tablet. Phew, that's all. It seems like I've said so much, but in reality, this is just a part of the program's functions and capabilities. And it's the same in any program. So, to the experts on the Intel site, please don't write in the comments that I forgot to mention something here. For instance, you could have assigned scale changes through the keyboard or tablet buttons and so on. Folks, this guide is mainly for beginners and those just getting acquainted with drawing programs. That's why if I were to explain everything, I might confuse these people, and the lesson would end up becoming endlessly long. That's it. I guess that's all about the programs. Now, let's move on to the most delicious and interesting part, trying to explain all this that I've shown you now. How it works in practice, using this drawing of an eye as an example. I won't directly explain how the eye itself is drawn, because there was a separate video on the channel about that topic. Instead, I'll focus on techniques, working methods, and the sequence of actions. Let's get started. So, I've already created a new canvas. This will be the first layer, on which I'll draw a sketch of the eye's outline. On the palette, I select black, the tool, a pencil, and start drawing the eye's contour. I'm not used to pressing too hard with the stylus, so I chose a relatively large brush size. But as you can see, the lines are thin. The sketch is drawn somewhat similarly to a quick pencil sketch on tracing paper, meaning not a single solid line but rather hatched. On a tablet without a monitor, you need a certain habit to develop a connection between your hand and what's happening on the computer screen. To expedite this process, special exercises need to be done. I didn't dedicate a separate segment of the video to them, because they're covered in almost every tablet video on YouTube. Generally, what are these exercises? Most often, it's drawing simple geometric figures in large quantities and outlining the contours of various drawings or photographs. I'd also recommend doing drawings of simple oil paintings or art without outlines, directly using color, spots, like in painting. As for my sketch, it looks a bit rough and uneven at the moment, but there's nothing scary about it. I'll correct it now. But what I really don't like here is that the eye appears a bit too high. So I'll use the rectangular selection tool to move it down a bit. That's better. To remove the selection, simply click on an unselected field using any of the selection tools. Now, how will I make corrections? It's very simple. With layers, I create a new layer, reducing the opacity of the old one beforehand. To draw on top, the empty layer must be above the old one, and it needs to be selected in the Layers panel. I primarily need the outline not for beauty. I'm not trying to create a comic, so I mostly disregard the beauty of the lines. For me, the line is just a guide. And this new layer, it's kind of a correcting layer. I'm trying to find more appropriate bends in the lines. That's better. Now this linear sketch, or as digital artists say, the line needs to be colored. This is also done in layers, usually not just one. I deleted my first linear layer, then created a new one. Although it could have been simpler, just clearing the content of the first layer. In the color panel, I selected a slightly pinkish, fleshy tone. I start coloring using an airbrush. See what happens if the coloring layer is placed above the linear one. The color of the coloring layer seems to cover it, so don't forget to place it below. Then you can both color and preserve the lines. First, I'll color the skin tone with one layer. Then I'll move on to coloring the iris of the eye. The eye will be green, so I selected the corresponding color and started filling it in. I messed up a bit here because this should have been done with a new layer right away. But I started lumping everything into one, so after sketching everything out, I had to cut out the iris with the pupil and paste it into a new layer. I intentionally skipped this part of the video to avoid confusing you. As you can see, I slightly outlined the iris with a darker shade around the circle, and I drew the pupil almost black. Now I'll even it out. Thanks to the round brushes, you can simply choose the right size for yourself and draw a circle right away. By the way, you could have drawn the iris the same way, but we're not looking for easy ways. For denser coloring, you can even use a pencil. Alright. Next, I decided to draw shadows on the skin, although logically it would have been more appropriate to outline the eyeball. But I like this darker aspect, so it takes priority. Shadows are drawn with shades close to the light tone, in the same layer. The choice of brushes depends on what you want to achieve. If you need a very smooth coloring, start with an airbrush and then switch to watercolor to create gradients. If you want strokes, choose a brush and avoid blurring with watercolor. You can combine different brushes, and that's exactly what I'm doing now, using a combination of an airbrush, brush, and watercolor. And I think for now, these shadows on the skin are sufficient. Now, I need to work on the other parts of the eye, because the principle of parallel drawing has not been abandoned here. So, I'll color the eyeball. I selected the required color from the palette. For convenience, made the skin layer invisible. As you might have already understood, I'll also do this coloring in a new layer. I already had an empty layer, so I'll draw on it. If you haven't understood why I'm coloring in layers yet, I'll try to explain. Imagine that I currently have only one layer. In this case, I'd have to color very carefully. I couldn't overlap on the green or go beyond the contour. But with layers, I can work very freely because this specific layer is at the bottom, and everything you don't need to see is covered by the upper layers. This is just one of the simplest uses of layers. As for the iris, I've roughly outlined the shadows for now. I started with a pencil, then moved to an airbrush, but the final smoothing will be done with a watercolor brush. To fully demonstrate its capabilities, I intentionally created a few sharp shadow lines with the pencil. See how well it smudges them. Where I want to blend the color, I almost don't press the stylus. And where I want to add, I press a bit harder. Right now, this color might seem very dark to you, but it's not. When the skin tone appears, you'll understand. By the way, this is one of the reasons why all parts of the drawing need to be developed in parallel. This is how everything looks together now. Generally, the information and techniques I've shown you so far should suffice for the time being, so I'll proceed faster and only stop for explanations on new, interesting techniques or areas. Specifically regarding the drawing, I need to smooth the skin tone, add shadows and relief to certain elements, outline the iris with details, draw the tear duct, and create eyelashes. Now, I want to briefly focus on drawing details in the iris. You see that I've increased the scale. Generally, thanks to the tablet's scale, you can create very detailed work. But that's not the point right now. I increased the contrast and started drawing stripes from the edge towards the center using a brush. This is where its properties come in handy, changing thickness and tone with pressure and blending effect. To make the iris look like glass, I'll continue drawing such stripes, light green, dark green, and even slightly yellow. Sometimes I'll blend them with a watercolor brush. Take another look at how it works. Since I'm not drawing a sketch or a comic, I don't really need an outline, so I can remove it now. You'll notice that without the outline, the eye looks quite blurred. I'll try to fix this with harder brushes, meanwhile refining the shadows and adjusting the iris's shape. Right now on the screens, you're seeing a very interesting shot. This is how the eye sphere looks under the skin. It's a demonstration of what I mentioned earlier when I talked to you about drawing in layers. I continue working. Another interesting technique. Sometimes there are inconvenient spots where it's difficult to make a stroke or line along the necessary trajectory. I'm facing such a spot right now. You could struggle for a long time, attempt it multiple times, or simply rotate the drawing and make a convenient stroke. Here's another neat trick. Shadows don't necessarily have to be one shade. You can add, for instance, a cooler color. It's like a typical glaze, a semi-transparent tone over another color. The drawing becomes less blurry, gaining contrast. Eyelashes wouldn't hurt. Since the drawing isn't finished yet, I'll be editing the skin tone, so I'm making the eyelashes on a new layer. I'm drawing them with a brush to ensure the tips are thin and transparent. Experiment with different brushes and techniques. The lashes are done, the drawing looks more unified, and it's easier to work with. Because the lashes are on a separate layer, I can continue adjusting the other layers. The final trick, color adjustment. I'm showing how to fine-tune tones using filters and color correction. Seems like my eye looks decent. Initially, I didn't plan to make it look like a photograph, so that would take more time. All that's left is to put a signature and export the image. I hope you found it interesting to watch. I probably won't do a video of this scale again soon. Comment below about how you found this informative video format. You can also express your wishes for future videos on graphic tablets. But please, don't ask for a specific drawing. We need broad topics that are interesting to a wide audience. That's it. Wishing you success and creative achievements. See you in new videos. Bye for now.